Elizabeth Ann Bayley Seton, born on August 28th in 1774, and died on January 4th, 1821. So the 4th of January is the day we remember her in our Lesser Feast and Fast Great Cloud of Witnesses. And this is a beautiful statue that I think Kirby used in her presentation last time, but it seems to be commonly used. It's not just of Elizabeth Ann Seton, or I think it was Harriet Bedell that Kirby did. Is that right?
Harriet Bedell, yeah. Her feast day is this week.
Yeah, right, right. Anyway, it's a, as I tell you her story, you'll see how it's an equally appropriate statue for Elizabeth Seton. It's also one that is part of the St. Vincent's Health System in Florida, so I thought it was appropriate. And as you can see, she is referred to as mother, convert, educator, and foundress. So I'm going to take us on a little circuitous way before we get started. And I want to talk a little bit about the importance of telling stories, which is what we are doing in this series as we tell the stories of men and women who have gone home by another way as a result of where they have been on their spiritual journeys. I'm going to have to admit people as I'm talking, so forgive a pause every now and then. Hi, Joe. Hi, Joe.
Hi, Owene. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
Great, thanks.
I've decided that being on a Zoom call at the beginning is sort of like being the Waltons when they were going to bed, and you stop every 5 seconds. Hi, 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 welcome. Anyway, here we go. Elizabeth Ann Seton. As I began to prepare for this class, I was at first struck by what seemed to be the plainness of Elizabeth Seton. As you will hear later, I had a pretty bad taste in my mouth for her, and I wasn't sure if any of you would be interested in her. A friend even asked, how did she go home by another way? And yet, as I delved deeper and deeper into her story, I discovered the great similarities between her story and my story. And that discovery reminded me of how important it is to tell our stories in our spiritual life. When I first began studying writing your spiritual memoir, I learned about this image, the image of what they call the cosmic egg. It's an ancient mythical symbol, as many of you know, but for our sake, it is an excellent visual of the interweaving of our stories with the great patterns in stories that are always true. The great story, the story, encompasses all. Our story is our group identity within the great story. And right at the heart of it all is my little story. As you can see, just me, private, small life, searching for significance. So if I don't tell my story to you and you tell your story to me, we will never fully understand how we fit into the great story. That story of creation and sin and judgment and redemption. Storytelling is how we tell the good news, how we share the good news. It's how we keep the incarnation going, ongoing. And as retired Bishop Porter Taylor says, Porter was the first person that I took instruction from about spiritual memoir. He says, it means that God is part of this world, part of our lives, part of the movement of the divine will to being done on earth as it is in heaven. You'll notice I wanted to make sure you could see at the bottom here that it says, healthy and biblical religion includes the whole cosmic egg. I thought that was an important line. So today I will tell you a bit of the story of Elizabeth Seton and how it ties with a bit of my story. And I hope and pray that you will discern how these stories tie in with your story and ultimately with the great story, the story of the people of God and the incarnation of our Lord. And there is no better time in our church year, in the church year, for us to look for that divine spark of the incarnation and the light it gives off, and for the Christ child to be born and grown and made manifest in us again. Elizabeth Ann Seton, born into a well-to-do family, reared in the Episcopal Church, pre-American Revolution, a true daughter of the American Revolution. When she was 19, she married into another wealthy family, the family of William Seton, who was a prominent businessman, and with him, they had 5 children. And as a young wife and mother, she founded the Society for the Relief of Poor Widows with Small Children. And this quote comes from the early days of her founding of that society. Disorder in the society is the result of disorder in the family. And so she felt the call to keep families together and to help particularly widows who were unable to continue to raise their children. In 1801, her husband's business went bankrupt, and in 1803, he contracted tuberculosis. So with 5 children and a very sick husband, she had to decide what to do. And in search of children, I'm sorry. Nancy, could you mute yourself? In search of treatment, the Setons and their 8-year-old daughter went to Italy, hoping that the warm climate there would cure his disease. And instead, the Italian authorities, fearing yellow fever, quarantined them in an old leper hospital for the dying. And this is a view from that old hospital, supposedly. But the quote is from one of Elizabeth Seton's journals, where she says, "My eyes smart so much with crying, wind, and fatigue that I must close them and lift up my heart. God is our all indeed. If sufferings abound in us, his consolations also greatly abound and far exceed all utterance. If I could forget my God one moment at these times, I should go mad." While in Italy, Elizabeth and her family were befriended by Roman Catholics, which led to her ultimate conversion to Catholicism. Faithful Roman Catholic friends brought the family mattresses, food, and wood for the small fireplace. They spent 25 days in seclusion, during which William's condition steadily worsened. However, almost miraculously during this time, after never having believed in Jesus, he came to accept Jesus as his Lord and Savior. And that was a very important transformation for Elizabeth. William unfortunately died as they were on their way back to the United States. And when she returned to England with her 8-year-old daughter and collected the other 4 children, her Episcopalian family, who discovered that she had converted to Catholicism, were deeply opposed to her and shunned her. And so she found herself alone with 5 children to support in great financial crisis, just like the poor widows that she had formed the society for in her younger days. She turned to the Roman Catholic clergy for support and eventually began a congregation of women religious patterned after the French Daughters of Charity, of St. Vincent de Paul. In 1809, Elizabeth moved with her family to Emmitsburg, Maryland, where she took vows and became Mother Seton to a small community of 7 women known as Sisters of Charity of St. Joseph, dedicated to teaching. She was the first native-born citizen of the United States to be canonized in the Roman Catholic Church. The sisters intertwined social ministry, education, and religious formation, as well as operating orphanages in Philadelphia and New York City. And I did some research on her, a lot of research, as you all do when you're preparing for this, but I got to some Roman Catholic websites that were so interesting because she's a very, very important saint for young children and for their catechism and their first communion. They do a lot of studying about Mother Seton and her work. And it was just interesting to find and to look at what they prepared on her. The Sisters of Charity community was the first of its kind established in the United States. There are 5 independent communities of the Sisters of Charity that now exist, offering ministry and care for the most vulnerable. And Elizabeth Ann Seton remained the mother of the Sisters of Charity until her death on the 4th of January, 1821. In 1965, the National Shrine of Elizabeth Seton and the Basilica of St. Elizabeth Ann Seton was consecrated in Emmitsburg, Maryland. And in 1975, she was canonized. And as I said earlier, she was the first native-born American to be canonized by the Roman Catholic Church. Her nephew was named James Roosevelt Bailey. He was the Bishop of Newark, and he founded Seton Hall University in New Jersey and named it after his aunt. Like his aunt, he began as an Episcopalian, though he was even ordained as an Episcopal priest, but he left the Episcopal Church and was ordained as a Roman Catholic priest, drawn to Catholicism like Elizabeth. He was buried at the National Shrine of his aunt right next to her. So a penniless widow becomes a nun, founds a convent, leaves the Episcopal Church, becomes a Roman Catholic, and spends the rest of her life ministering to needy girls and orphans. Not a very exciting character, some would say, but I have a fond place in my heart for her. You see, once upon a time, someone told me my calling was to be like Elizabeth Seton, not to serve the church as an ordained person, as I thought, but to devote the rest of my life to caring for the needy as a layperson, just like Elizabeth Seton. And that person even took down off the wall this picture and showed it to me. At first, I was taken aback by this suggestion, and for years, I have been troubled by that incident. However, preparing this presentation helped me understand a little bit better that unusual suggestion, because that person had read my spiritual autobiography, and in it, he discovered that, like Elizabeth, I too was reared in the Episcopal Church, but befriended by a Roman Catholic and drawn to Roman Catholicism. And I would like to share a little bit of that story with you. As a child, my family lived in England, as many of you know. We lived in quarters on an old abandoned Royal Air Force base that had been active during the Second World War. We played in abandoned air raid shelters like the one on the left, and even in the ruins of the old hospital. We attended the Church of England and I sang in the choir. And I attended choir practice in a building which might have been the very building that is on the right on the slide. Every time in that building was our choir room and a grocery store called the Naffy and a little Roman Catholic chapel. And every time I went to choir practice, I saw a candle lit in the chapel. Always there was a candle lit in the chapel. And one day when I saw the priest, who my family knew, his name was Father French, I asked him about it. And from him, I learned about the use of a candle for the perpetual presence of Christ. I was 10 years old, and I decided I wanted to be a Roman Catholic. And not only that, I thought I'd like to be a nun. However, this was our church, St. Neville Church, near the abandoned runway, a dark, cold Norman church built in 1297 with no perpetual presence of Christ that I could see. Instead, the carvings on the pews had all been chopped off by Cromwell's men, and it was barren and stark. But within the year after my brush with Catholicism, it was time for me to be confirmed. And my dreams of being a Roman Catholic perished when I was confirmed on December 10th, 1966, at Truro Cathedral, confirmed as a member of the Church of England, as I like to say, a real Anglican. I have never forgotten that first understanding of the perpetual presence of Christ, and it has played a tremendous role in my spiritual journey, in my life, and in my way of living. It was what sent me home by another way, just as the kindness of the Roman Catholics did for Elizabeth Seton. So I'd like to leave you with these questions and perhaps have some conversation. Where in your story were you sent home by another way? Who or what in your life shed the light of Christ for you so that your life was never the same? And is that why you are here with us today? I'd like to stop sharing and stop my screen share and see if we can have some conversation. Hi, Betsy. Hi, Nancy. Everybody unmute now and let's have a chat.
Good morning. Before we get started on that, do you have any more clarity on that wonderful expression, my eyes were smart with crying? I love it.
Isn't that beautiful?
Yes.
Her journals are available and her writing is very, whatever you would call it, Victorian, very, of that day and time, but it's beautiful. And she was deeply, deeply moved by the care of those Roman Catholics and thus lived the rest of her life in response to that.
Is that a common term in smart, identifying something smart with 19th century writings?
Oh, I don't know.
That word smart?
Oh, too smart for something?
Uh-huh.
Sylvia?
No, the way she's using it, I'm sure means to hurt.
Oh, right.
When something's
right.
smart, it's not necessarily meaning intelligent. I'm sure that she meant hurt with crying.
Oh, exactly. Yes. Yeah. I grew up with people saying that smarts a bit, doesn't it?
Yes, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
It's a beautiful line though, isn't it?
Oh, yes. It really captivated me.
So what are your thoughts about these questions? You want me to put them back up? Let's see. Or do you have any comments, any other comments or thoughts or questions about the other information?
I think that one of the connections that I feel with Elizabeth Ann Seton is that she had, after she converted to Catholicism and her husband had died, actually I did that in reverse, her husband died, then she converted, she had wanted to found a United States branch of the Daughters of Charity of St. Vincent de Paul, which was from France. But she couldn't because of the times. It was the Napoleonic Wars, and so she couldn't. And so she founded the Convent of St. Joseph, but then that did evolve once the wars had been settled, that did evolve into the Daughters of Charity. And my family has always been very connected with St. Vincent's Hospital, where the daughters just were an immense part of that. For all the time that I was growing up, they not only were the administrators there, but they staffed it. You know, there were sisters on the floor.
Yeah.
And they wore those very unique, instead of a veil, they wore the starched cornets with wings over their head. And one of the first memories I have of being kind of taken aback, I saw one of them who was in the middle of a procedure, and they simply put a gown on over their habit, and the wings of the cornet, they just folded straight up and pinned, and so they looked like white cone heads. It was a striking image for a 6-year-old. But the sisters at St. Vincent really did embody, they were all about building the building for the hospital, but also all about the care of the patients. They visited in rooms, and when other nurses finished their shifts and went home, the sisters finished their shifts, went to prayer, and then came back and visited on the halls with the patients who might be a little bit unsettled in the evening. They were just amazing people. And it just, I have no idea why it was Elizabeth Ann Seton wished to affiliate with that order, because they weren't yet present in the United States. I don't know if she ran into them when she was in Italy. I don't know what the connection is, but it's always struck me that was her desire, was actually to bring the Daughters of Charity to the United States. And indeed, that's exactly what happened up in Emmitsburg, Maryland.
Michael, she was actually asked by a Roman Catholic bishop. She was sort of tapped to be the one to bring the Sisters of Charity of St. Francis de Sales to America. And they couldn't do it at the time for the very reason you just said. That's how she founded the other society.
I have had,
Go ahead.
I have had the fortune to work under some of the sisters at St. Vincent's, and I always felt really comfortable working with them as a nurse, because they would always, you didn't realize it, but they knew everything that was going on. And that was just a really comfortable feeling, because you knew you could turn to them if you had a question or a problem. Now when I worked with them, they were covering several floors, not just one. And then the other thing, I'd been a patient at St. Vincent's, and I loved the morning prayer and evening prayer that the sisters do at the end, the beginning and end of the day.
I've never been a patient at St. Vincent's, but I've always wondered what it would be like, because I've always thought having the sisters present must make a big difference.
I'm not sure that the sisters are there anymore.
Really?
Well, St. Vincent's is under another umbrella, so I haven't heard anybody mention them.
The sisters are now much more into administration, and the umbrella that under the Ascension system is a organization of the Daughters of Charity. But unfortunately, about 6 years ago, as was true for sisters all around the country, if not the world, they are shrinking in numbers. And so they made the decision to simply leave certain areas where they were, and Jacksonville is one of the places they left. So they haven't been here for the last 5 or 6 years.
Betsy and I are in a writing group and have participated in retreats at the convent of the Sisters of St. Joseph in St. Augustine. And that's always been a lovely place to go, very peaceful, and that holy presence is so profound there. Well, I know it's kind of a daunting question to think about where in your story you've been sent home by another way, and these are really rhetorical questions more than anything. They're food for thought. And of course, they're the theme of what we are doing here. But as I thought about it, it was just quite remarkable to think about how similar our stories were. And then each of you has a story that is probably very similar in some way to these stories that we've talked about today. The characters are all very different, and the storyline might be different, but where it fits into the great story is not so different.
Well, I'll answer the second question. I had the fortune of being under the wing of my mother and grandmother, and I never knew a difference of not knowing Christ. I mean, from the time I was born and in the cradle roll at church. And my grandmother was a Sunday school teacher, and at one point she got an award because she had 200 students under her care. She was a kindergarten teacher and a devout Christian, as was my mother. So I never knew any difference. I mean, I was taught from birth that you help others, and who was at the head of our house and that type thing. So I enjoy hearing other people's stories, but I don't feel like I have a story other than that because I never knew a difference. I will tell you one story. When I was carrying our first child, about 2 or 3 weeks before he was born, I went to the door of the nursery. I was putting the nursery together, and something told me something was wrong. And I didn't know what it was, but I didn't finish the nursery, and I never said a word to anybody. Well, the child was born with a heart defect. And we had to leave him in the hospital for 2 weeks. And when we were bringing him home, the doctor said to us, and he was at St. Vincent's, by the way, the doctor said to us, don't love this child, it's not going to live. Well, he's 60 years old now and had heart surgery at St. Vincent's, the first one to have heart surgery at St. Vincent's. But if I hadn't had that faith in Christ in my life, I don't know that we could have managed it for 6 years before he had surgery, because I thought all along we may lose him, and there were chances that we would. And there was a reason that he didn't die. I'm sure and you learn your lessons in life from those kind of situations.
That's a wonderful story, Nina.
I almost felt like Mary in the Bible, Jesus' mother. When you have those experiences and the love that you have for your child, look at the love she had for him.
Well, and to be told, don't love him too much, he's not going to live.
That was because they didn't expect him to, and they needed to prepare us. And it was a hard preparation, but they needed to prepare us. If you have time, I'll tell you one quick little thing. That we brought him home, and then he cried all night. And the next morning, my mother came and she said, well, maybe they need to change his formula. So I called the pediatrician and told him the first words out of my mouth was, my mother said, and he said, Nana, this is not your mother's baby, it's yours. And right then at 22, so I knew who had to be in charge of this child.
And did changing the formula help?
I don't think so. I don't think
Yeah.
he changed it. He'd been in light the whole time he'd been in the hospital, and we didn't have the lights on. And he didn't know us. I mean, if you never held your baby that you had and he was 2 weeks old, and we held him a couple of times in the hospital, but he was in a new and different surrounding.
Mm-hmm. Nina, our fourth grandchild was born with a heart defect and had open heart surgery when he was a week old, and is alive and well now and will be 3 in February. So I can relate a little bit to your story. And Kate baptized him in the hospital the night before his surgery.
Oh, good.
And then we had a reception service. We received him at the font at St. John's Cathedral.
Oh, how nice. What a nice story. But
Go ahead.
important to tell your story.
It really is. Any other thoughts before we close?
Good morning,
You
everybody.
mentioned the Sisters of St. Joseph from St. Augustine, and they are the only order that has a mother house anywhere near our area. And those happen to be the sisters that I grew up with, because they were not only at St. Paul's in Riverside, where I went to school, but then later at Bishop Kenny, where I went to school. So other parishes and other schools in the area have the Dominicans or the Irish Sisters of Mercy, the School Sisters of Notre Dame, but I happen to have the Sisters of St. Joseph. And it is absolutely true. I look at that question, who has shed the light of Christ for you? It's absolutely true. These are people that I still correspond with. There are not many from my many years in the Catholic Church that I keep in touch with, but I still correspond, especially with one sister whom I had 3 times for classes at Kenny, and she's now living in the retirement convent. She's, long since past serving her time. She's not in wonderful health, but she sends the most marvelous notes, and I write her, and it's just so wonderful to hear from her. And what struck me about these ladies as I grew up was how totally they were giving of themselves to help other people. They just weren't doing much for themselves. If you visit in a convent, it's perfectly comfortable and nicely furnished, but it's very plain. They don't go into this for the way that they live, for what they gain monetarily. They do this really just to serve others. And in a very real way, it has been the sisters, whether the Daughters of Charity, the Sisters of St. Joseph, who had such an influence over me during my growing years.
If you ever are looking for a place to go on a silent retreat or with a little group of people, the Sisters of St. Joseph's have taken where their postulants used to live, and they just don't have many anymore, and they've turned them into little motel rooms. And it's a retreat center, and they provide lunch, breakfast and dinner, and then allow you to have your meetings and our writing sessions in their various rooms, and the accommodations are just fine. Very, very simple and sparse, but comfortable.
Is that across from the mother house?
Yes. Mhm.
Okay.
And it's all on the one campus, so it's protected. It's surrounded by a fence and gates. It was a lovely place, and they have a little fountain in the middle of the complex, and you can hear it in every room. So it's the presence of the living water is a constant reminder.
I'd like to say something. Good morning, everybody.
Hi, Nancy.
My daughter Martha was born at St. Mary's Hospital in Long Beach, California, which is a Roman Catholic hospital. And I got excellent care from all the nuns. This was my first experience to be involved, I mean, person to person with a nun. I had never spoken to a nun before. I was raised in New England, and you would see them getting on buses and things like that, but the care that they gave was unbelievable. And whenever I wanted anything, they were right there. So they were selfless, and to go into that profession, they had to be. So it was quite an experience for me. I was quite young at the time, but I'll never forget it because they did take very good care of everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to think, well, especially the new mothers.
It seems like everything the nuns that I have been around do is based on their solitary focus of serving Jesus in each person with whom they come in contact. Yeah, thank you for telling us that story, Nancy.
You're welcome.
Well, we'll continue this series next week, and I can't remember if it's Michael or Joe. Help me out, guys.
It's me. Well, it's not me. It'll be about Eartha White, and there are a lot of parallels in her life with Elizabeth Seton. So
Good.
I look forward to sharing her with you.
Good. And then Michael is Antony of the Desert the following week. And then Linda is that right? No?
Yes, that's correct. Not as many parallels with Elizabeth Ann Seton, but that is correct.
And then Linda is Phillips Brooks after that. So anyway, I'd like to close with this collect, which I'm not sure that this is our collect for Elizabeth Seton, but I thought it was too beautiful not to share. So the Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Let us pray. O God, who crowned with the gift of true faith Saint Elizabeth Ann Seton's burning zeal to find you, grant by her intercession and example that we may always seek you with diligent love and find you in daily service with sincere faith. Through our Lord Jesus Christ, your Son, who lives and reigns with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, one God, forever and ever. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you all for being here. We don't have to sign off right away, but that's all I have for today.
Thank you, Owene.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Owene.
Great to see you.